Good morning to all and welcome to Byju's exam prep. I am Basavaraj. So we'll be continuing the disaster management class, what we have stopped yesterday. Hope I am audible as well as visible to you all. Good morning to all of you. Yes. So please confirm that I am audible as well. Good morning to all of you who are joining and warm welcome to all. So we were discussing about the disaster management, and in that we discussed the droughts, floods, something which is in the current affairs, like why many states are complaining regarding the drought manual of 2016, which is different from 2009. So two drought manuals are there. One is 2009 and second one is 2016. Now 2016 has been replaced by that. So 2009 has been replaced by 2016. Then we discussed something about landslides, avalanches, etc. And while defining the landslides, we made an effort in understanding the reason behind the landslides, the vulnerability profile of landslide in India, and also something about the avalanches. And then, while defining the landslide perspectives, we made an effort in understanding the reason behind the landslides. Then the disaster preparedness in the context of landslides. And while defining that, I told something about the zonation map. And we discussed about the zonation map as well. So this map plays a very important role. This zonation map plays an important role. Because this map are the areas which are covered on the degrees of vulnerability. Degrees of vulnerability. Through this map, we can make certain aspects of planning, like if the area is vulnerable for landslides, we can restrict the settlements then. If the area is vulnerable for landslides, then we can regulate or stop certain economic activities in that areas. Or we can plan for planting the trees, or we refer them as afforestation. So that's why this zonation map is very, very important. We can find that even in the context of floods as well. And for this, we always have to depend on the updated technologies. And we are always improving them with the technologies like the cutting edge technology, which we are planning for next month, something called as NISAR. And already we have having a group of INSAT satellites, which gives the data about all the wind pattern, all the land patterns, all the glacial deposits there. Apart from national, international data are also available for us, which help us in understanding the early warning systems and also the movement of water there. So this is what we studied till yesterday. Now, next perspective is that guidelines for landslides and avalanches. Now, we have to always update the inventory. It means we have to always update whatever information is there regarding the landslide. Why? Because in the context of landslide, there is always lack of data. There is always lack of data. That is first thing. Second, these landslides always vary from one place to another place. The reasons for the landslides are not the same. In one area, it may be due to heavy rainfall. In one area, it may be due to earthquake. In one area, it may be due to deforestation. So there is no uniformity in the landslides. No uniformity in landslides. They vary from place to place. And also we find the land use pattern has been changed. Like initially it was a forest, now it has been reduced into agricultural fields. So land use pattern has been changed. Pattern is changed. Plus, due to the impact of global warming and climate change, we always find the precipitation patterns or rainfall patterns have also changed. Rainfall patterns are also changed. Patterns have changed. Now, when the uniformity is not there, when the land use patterns are changing, when the rainfall patterns are changing, you can't keep the old data. You have to always update that. You have to always update that. So hence, you should always update with the present scenarios of the mountains. So that is the first aspect. Second, landslide hazard zonation map is done. Now this is what we discussed. This map will help us to understand where the settlements is allowed, where the settlement is not allowed, and which area is used for forestation. Which area is used for afforestation. That is planting of the trees, etc. So this you should keep in the mind. Landslide zonation. It makes areas for settlements to be allowed. Economic activities should be regulated so that we can plan in the context of any early symptoms of disasters. Then studies and monitoring of the selected landslides. Now here you should remember, when we talk about study and monitoring of the selected landslides, as I told, these landslides do not have any uniformity. The more you study, the more information we get about that. So hence, the more knowledge will help us to reduce the risk. So it will help us to reduce the risk. Right. And apart from that, when you are knowing the data, when you are understanding that the reason behind that and which time of the year such types of landslides are there, then we can make a proper preparedness. So it is reducing risk and preparedness. Preparedness. It means that you have to equip everything in the pre-disaster management. Then updating early warning system. So this is always seen as the scenarios. We should always update that early warning system. At present, we are using the data, example, Doppler radars. We are using the data from international resources. We are using the data of the present basic knowledges. So we have to update that so that it will create huge accuracy in the context of prediction to increase the accuracy. Right. Then institutional measures are there. So the major idea of institutional measure is to increase the capacity. Capacity of the individual, capacity of the society, capacity of the group of people involved there. So this can be done by providing them proper training, creating awareness. Now, once the awareness is created, training is given, they can become a part of disaster management. The local people, they can become a part of disaster management. Example, we are having a volunteer group of people who take certain types of activities in the context of disaster management, like a volunteer group called as Apda Mitra. Apda Mitra. A volunteer group. Local people, they take up the trainings like first aid training, basic trainings, and they create awareness among the people about the hazards. So this is one such example. Then there should be coordination between different ministries, coordination between different organizations, right? Coordination between different institutions. So when there is a proper coordination, then that will help to effectively manage the crisis as well as risk. So this will 100% reduce the impact of the particular hazard there. So these are referred as the guidelines for landslide and avalanches, which are given by National Disaster Management Authority. The guidelines are given by National Disaster Management Authority. Right. Now, next is a case study. Sometimes in current affairs, they may ask. We have seen that a case of land subsidence took place in Joshimath. Land subsidence took place in Joshimath of Uttarakhand. Right. So Uttarakhand is always vulnerable for disasters. More specifically, the Kumaon and Gadwal region. Kumaon, Gadwal region, where we find large amount of disasters are there, hazards are there, like we have earthquake, we have landslides, we have glacial lake outburst floods, and also the last year we have witnessed something called as land subsidence. There are many reasons which are given to that. We don't have exact reason. So probable reasons are there. Probable reason for that. Where the land sunk, land subsidence means sinking of a land. The land moves downward, where it will develop a huge cracks, not only on the ground, but also on the buildings. Now here, a data which was given by ISRO and all. We always seen that continuously the land subsidence was there. Sinking of land was there. And this sinking of the land became dangerous, which created impact on the local residential peoples, where they have a threat of collapsing of the buildings. Now, next perspective is that what are the probable reasons for that? Why it was there? Now, if you see the geology of that area, this Joshimath is constructed on the slope of the mountain, which already has the subsidence. And over a period of a time, it become stable. And on that, the construction activities or the settlements have been done. So Joshimath is built on a slope which has been done there by a previous landslide. Already the landslide has taken there thousands of years back. So on that debris which was somewhat stable, the construction activities were taken. The settlements were done. And then on that, we started constructing the hydroelectricity projects and all. Now, these hydroelectricity projects, digging, etc., which made destabilization, which have weakened the slope, and that had made sinking of Joshimath. So this is probably the first reason. Second reason is, when they construct the tunnels, they make the digging of ground, maybe hydroelectricity projects, or maybe connectivity of water here. So when they dig downward, the groundwater where the aquifers are seen. So puncturing of aquifers was done. And this puncturing of aquifer make the leakages of the water, again, which made the soil to become weak and sink. So this is because of construction activities. More specifically, the Tapovan Vishnugad project, where the tunnel was punctured and it resulted in the water discharge. And this water which entered there was responsible for loosening of the soil, and which makes the collapsing of the land. So that is the second reason. The third reason, what they say is inadequate drainage and disposal of the waste. So no proper planning for settlements. Right. So inadequate drainage and wastewater disposal system. So the blockages were there. So this made the blockages. And most of the houses, they have the soak pits where the accumulation of water was there. And this soak pits pushed down the material into the ground, which resulted in the sinking. So no proper drainage facilities. So that might be the third probable reason. Then the fourth reason which is given for that is explosives which were used for construction of roads, construction of hydroelectricity projects there. Right. Roads, bypass means roads, which included drilling, etc. And this has impacted the foundation of Joshimath. Then they also say that it may be because of indiscriminate and unplanned robust construction, which decrease the carrying capacity of the Joshimath. So here we find tourism activities are more. The number of tourist people have increased there. So we refer that as unsustainable tourism. Unsustainable tourism. Plus unplanned construction of the buildings for settlements there. For the tourist, maybe hotels, maybe resorts, maybe something. So they have made constructions in that areas. And because of increasing of the people in the form of tourist and large amount of deforestation which was done there to construct the settlements there, which reduced the carrying capacity of Joshimath. So its carrying capacity was affected. And in the ecology and environment, you have to remember what is carrying capacity. It is the services which can be supplied or which can be provided by a particular ecosystem to that population. Now, Joshimath is also an ecosystem which is having a mountain terrains. So this made a collapse. Plus, due to continuously increasing of the global average temperature, the rainfall patterns have been changed. Cloud burstings were there, like 2013 Kedarnath floods, cloud burstings in that areas. All these accumulated. So all these accumulated from 2015 to 2021, where we find large amount of cloud burstings. Also huge floods in that areas. So all these heavy rainfall and large amount of weather disturbances were also responsible for the land subsidence in the context of Kedarnath. So these are referred as subsidence in Joshimath. So these are referred as probable reason. If UPSC asks, what are the probable reasons for the sinking of Joshimath? So you have to remember these. Again, I'm telling you, they are probable reasons. It may be combined or it may be any one of them. We are making more study on that. Once we complete the study, then we can say that what might be the reason for that. And in the beginning itself, I told that the landslide phenomena are complex. They vary from one place to another place. And what was the reason for the previous landslide may not be true for the present one. Because last time it may be because of earthquake, this time it may be because of heavy rainfall, or it may be because of deforestation, or it can be combined effect. It can be combined effect. So hence these all are complex hazards. Joshimat is prone to earthquake because it is a region where Indian plate has collided with the Eurasian plate. It is vulnerable for earthquake. Punctured means aquifers are the areas like rock structures or soil structures. So in that, when you pump that, the groundwater moves outside. So it means you are creating permeability in that. And that permeability will make the water to move out of the stored groundwater. Right. Now, what are the probable solutions for that? Again, you should always answer that with the probable solution. Probable solution. Probable. Please remember the words. The first one is declare the Himalayas as eco-sensitive zones and regulate big projects using devastation. Restrict them as ecosystems. When we say Himalaya is a fragile ecosystem, so it is very, very sensitive. Very, very sensitive. You declare that as an eco-sensitive and restrict the activities in that. Then a detailed carrying capacity assessment of Uttarakhand should be done. It means what is its present capacity, and based on that you can do certain planning activities. Right. It may be about restricting the tourists, or it may be the impact which is done due to the construction activities there. So planning can be done so that you can reduce the movement of tourists in that area, or you can restrict some construction activities so that the carrying capacity can be restored. That is second perspective. Third, improve early warning systems regarding cloud burstings and all. So always updation is required. It may be with a cutting edge, or it may be a state-of-art technology, but we always have to improve that part. Then detailed proper environment impact assessment should be done. So EIA means environment impact assessment. Before starting of any project, its impact has to be studied in detail. So on that basis only the permission should be given. So environment impact assessment is a key. Now, if you do the environment impact assessment, you can restrict the certain type of economic activities. And regarding the environment impact assessment and carrying capacity, I have explained that in detail in your ecology and environment classes. Right. Then controlled deforestation and overgrazing. So it means it is about restoring the forest area. Restoring the forest area. Right. Then structural and non-structural measures. Structural measures means destabilizing the slopes. Steep slopes should be destabilized. Destabilize the slopes. And if you are constructing any buildings, so earthquake resistant building should be constructed. Planting more trees, making barriers so that the debris should not reach to the ground. The non-structural measures includes budgetary allocation, training to the people, creating awareness among the forest areas, and also making arrangement for the shelters during the impact time. So we refer them as structural and non-structural measures, probable solutions for the Himalayan impact. Right. So these are the points which you should remember if anything is asked regarding the Joshimat episode of 2023. right? So subsidence is different from landslide. Subsidence means sinking of a land. Is that clear? So this completes the landslides and avalanches. Now next we move on to glacial lake outburst flood. See, regarding carrying capacity, it is the services, the benefits which the ecosystem provides to a population without degradation. We refer that as carrying capacity. Now, before moving down to the glacial lake outburst flood, now understand something called as glacial lakes. Right. Now, the glacial lakes are destabilizing, means breaking the slopes. Steep slopes should be broken so that they become gentle. So if the slopes are steep, then the debris will fall. If you break the slope, if you reduce their slope gradient, then the debris movement can be reduced. Glacial lakes. Now, the moment when you say glacial lakes, so these are found at the areas where large amount of glacier deposits are there. If you take the Himalayas, in the context of Himalayas, or in the context of Alps mountain, we find high altitude areas are there. High altitude areas where we find the glacial deposits are there. So in these areas, there is a possibility of developing glacial lakes. Now, in the context of India, where we take Himalayas, Himalayas are the part of the Hindu Kush Himalayan region. And this is a region where the third largest ice deposits are seen, apart from North Pole and South Pole. And hence Himalayas are often referred as the part of third pole of Earth. They are the part of third pole of the Earth. So remember, Himalayas are in the Hindu Kush Himalayan region. Hindu Kush Himalayan region. And this area, which is referred as part of a third pole, it is also the source of 10 big rivers. So hence, it is also referred as water tower of Asia. Water tower of Asia. Right. At higher altitudes. Now, in these mountains, more specifically in the Himalayan mountains, where we find large amount of glacier deposits are there. Large amount of glacial deposits are there. Now these glacials, they make movement very slowly. Sometimes they make very fast movement. If they make fast movement, then we refer that as avalanches, which is a disaster. Now these glacials, they move very slow down the slope. So when they move very slowly, they make erosion. They make erosion. And while doing the erosion, they remove the sediments which is on the slope of the mountains. And these sediments which are carried by them, we refer them as moraines. Erosion. So they carry the sediments which are on the slope of mountains. And these sediments, we refer them as moraines. Moraines. And these moraines, something like this, which are carried away by the glacier. So these moraines are something which acts as a temporary barrier for the flow of glacier. So these moraines, they act as a temporary barrier for the flow of glaciers. So we find the glacier stays there for some time. And apart from that, much glaciers are also there on the upper portion. So on the slopes also glaciers are there, which are stopped by temporary barriers called as moraines. Please remember this term, moraines. Temporary barriers. Right. Now, because of the increasing of the temperature, it will make the melting of the glacier. So due to the temperature, the glacier will melt. The glacier will melt. So once the glacier melts there, it will be like a bowl of ice. Within that, the water is accumulated. So this water, which is accumulated in the surrounding glacial region, is referred as the glacial lakes. So such lakes are referred as glacial lakes. Glacial lakes. Now these glacial lakes, they can be above the ice. Now if this is an ice, if this is an glacier, now these glacial lakes, they can be above the ice, or they can be side of the ice, edges of that, or they can be front of the glacier where the ice has melted and huge accumulation of water is seen. And such types of glaciers, we refer them as the glacial lakes. We refer them as glacial lakes, which are found in the slopes of the mountains. Now, when these glacials break, whenever there is a breach in the moraines, large amount of accumulated water will flow downward. So breaking of these glacial lakes, or breaching of these glacial lakes, maybe breaching of moraines. So large amount of water will flow downward. So this water which is accumulated will flow downward in a fraction of seconds. And we refer this as the lake which has bursted. And we refer that as glacial lake outburst flood. So we use the term glacial lake outburst flood. It is something like this. A lake has been created. If the accumulation of water increases there, maybe due to global warming or maybe due to climate change, these temporary moraines, they may not hold the water. They are temporary barriers. If the water exceeds beyond their holding capacity, then they will break up all the moraines, like something where you are seen in the dams also. When the strength of the dam barrier is not sufficient, entire water flows out with the pressure. Now the same thing takes place here also. When the moraines are unable to support the accumulated water, then the entire moraine breaches off and the water which has accumulated moves down the slope. We refer that as the glacial lake outburst floods. And this creates huge water which moves downward, and we refer them as flash floods. Flash floods. So these are the terms which you should remember. One is the glacial lake, and the second one is the glacial lake outburst flood. And in the context of India, the Himalayan region is most vulnerable in the context of GLOFs. Is that clear? Now, this is where the water is accumulated, either in the front side or in the top of the glacier or in the sides. Right? When they break, when they release the water, we refer them as the glacial lake outburst floods. So these all are glacier deposits. And due to global warming, we find they have been increasing over a period of time. And we have already experienced the glacial lake outburst flood in the year 2023 in the context of Sikkim, where more than 40 people were killed. More than 40 people were killed. Now, this is mainly because in the Sikkim, there was a glacial lake. And this glacial lake, in the context of Sikkim, is Lonak Lake. Lonak Lake. And here, first event was cloud bursting. First event was cloud bursting. After that, huge water entered into this lake. Now, when the water entered into the lake was not sufficient enough to store the water. Then this excess water which breached the glacial lake. And this Lonak Lake underwent glacial lake outburst flood and pushed the water downward. And they created what we refer them as flash floods. Flash floods. Is that clear? So this is what you should remember in the context of any type of that. Now here, if the temperature is not increasing, if it is completely covered with the ice, then it is not much danger. So here we find it is covered with entire glacier. So they are comparatively stable. They're not permanent. They're comparatively stable. But the melting of the glacier makes the threat. Is that clear? So please remember this, the 2023 episode in the Sikkim. Now, if you take the data of the glacial lakes in the context of India, so we have two union territories, Jammu Kashmir and Ladakh, plus the four states, Himachal Pradesh, Uttarakhand, Sikkim, Arunachal Pradesh. So 4 plus 2 union territories, which are vulnerable for glacial lake outburst floods, because these are the areas where we find the glacial deposits are there. And as I told, it is a water tower of Asia. So here we find the important river basins are there, like Brahmaputra Basin, which has a large amount of the glacial lakes. So this is a region where we find the glacial lakes have been created. Ganga River Basin, Amu Darya River Basin, so where we find large amount of the glacial lakes have been created. Now, blue colored are the glacial lakes, and they are increasing because of global warming. They are increasing because of global warming and climate change. Large amount of the greenhouse gases which are emitted, the black carbon which are emitted, are increasing the average temperature. So it is the greenhouse gas, it is the black carbon or brown carbon, black carbon or brown carbon, which pose threat to the increasing temperature. Is that clear? So this is something which you should remember. Next, when we talk about the factors contributing to the GLOFs, the reason for the GLOFs. Now the reason is the temporary barriers which are created. We refer them as moraines. So narrow and high moraine dams. So these are the temporary moraines which are created. Temporary. Very temporary moraines are there. They can't hold the water permanently. If the volume of water increases in this lake, then this will breach and reach to the lowland areas. Then earthquake. We all know that Himalayan region is an area where the two plates are meeting. So it is always vulnerable for the earthquake according to plate tectonic theory. So it is the area where the two plates are meeting. Then Indian plate is subsiding beneath the Eurasian plate, and it is grinding at the rate of 5 centimeters per year. Indian plate is still moving downward. It is grinding at the rate of 5 centimeters per year. And this creates a friction, and that friction is responsible for breaking the moraines or breaking the glaciers. Then, slope gradient. So, in the context of Himalayas, we always find steep slopes. And these steep slopes, they can't hold the glacier for a long period of a time. Steep slopes. Then large amount of deforestation, which destabilizes or which makes the glacier not to be stored or hold here. So deforestation makes them more vulnerable, because the moment when you remove the vegetation, they can't hold anything. Removal of vegetation. Then construction activities in that areas, which makes the soil loosen, which adds greenhouse gases, which adds black carbon, which adds greenhouse gases, black carbon, which accelerates the temperature of that area. Plus, it also makes physical harm in that area. Physical harm in that areas. Right. Next, global warming and climate change due to increasing of the average temperature. Due to increasing of the average temperature in that regions, due to greenhouse gases and black carbon, heavy rainfall like cloud bursting event of Sikkim. Then soil liquefaction. Now here you should understand soil liquefaction. Now, when we talk about the Earth's area, if it is saturated with the water, or temporary waters are there, in spite of that, this soil, it behaves like a rigid or hard part. Rigid or hard, which can make a stable part. Now, because of the pressure or other activities, due to pressure or other activities, the soil which is solid behaves like a liquid. So this soil which is rigid behaves like liquid. It means it loosens its rigidity, it loses its stability. And the moment when the soil loses its rigidness, rigidity or stability, we refer that as soil liquefaction. And the moment when it loses its stability, the entire water which is stored breaches down because of subsidence of the land there. And this also triggers the GLOFs, the glacial lake outburst flood. Is it clear? So soil liquefaction means, you have seen in the context of earthquakes, construction activities are there, big buildings are there, and the foundations of the buildings are very, very rigid because the soil behaves like a rigid characteristics. Now, sometimes because of the pressure, the soil loses its rigidity. It's something like this. If you keep the ice cream in the refrigerator, it will be like a solid. The moment when you take up, due to increasing temperature, it melts. Now here, in the context of soils, it is not the temperature. It is due to pressure and other factors. This rigid soil, it starts behaving like a liquid characteristics, which can be movable. And the moment when the soil loses its rigidity, stiffness, We refer that as soil liquefaction. Now, they will never ask you why and how it moves that. Only the term is important, soil liquefaction, where the soil loses its rigidity or stiffness, maybe due to pressure or maybe due to other factors. Pressure or other factors. When the soil loses its rigidity or stiffness, it behaves like a liquid, which makes the stability of that area very less. And whatever is accumulated above that will breach and move on. And this soil liquefaction is also one of the things which have been witnessed during the earthquake, which makes the collapsing of the buildings in the earthquake. Now, the same way here also, the soil liquefaction will make the collapsing of the glacial troughs there, which in turn increases the incidences of the glacial lake outburst flood. Is that clear? So please remember this. So these are referred as the factors contributing to the globs. Right. Now, next we move on to something which is referred as the disaster management guidelines. Now, this is the lake which was in 1970. And this is in the year 2022. So this amount of melting has taken place. This is mainly due to the impact of global warming and climate change. And this is referred as meltwater or glacial lake, where accumulation of water is done. Right. Then this will always trigger flash floods. Flash floods. And the moment when the flash floods are there, they obstruct other type of infrastructure, which will make the collapsing of bridges, collapse of bridges. The road connectivity is destroyed. Right. So that makes difficult for rescue and rehabilitation. Difficult in rescue and rehabilitation. Right. And that is where, if there is impact on other infrastructures due to the event, if other infrastructures are collapsed, then they will affect the rescue and rehabilitation, which will make increase in the deaths and injuries, because medicines will not reach at the time. We don't find the food reaching at the time, and it becomes very, very difficult to make the rescue and rehabilitation. So hence the casualties increases here. There is no electricity, there is no point of communication, so there is no way where the rescue teams can reach there very easily. So hence, in such incidences, we always find the casualties are always more. Is that clear? So please remember these things. Now, impact of the glacial lake outburst flood. The one thing is flash floods. So whenever glacial lake outburst floods are there, they always create flash floods. Huge amount of water, which destroys the local area and the settlements. Then landslides and soil erosion. Landslides and soil erosion. Huge land collapses. Soil erosion, fertile soil also moves from that. Loss of properties and infrastructure. The buildings collapses. The hotels which are constructed collapses. The hydroelectricity projects which are constructed will collapses. So huge collapsing will be there. The settlements, their economic activities are hampered. Projects like hydroelectricity projects are also destroyed there. displacement of the affected people. So many people who are affected, they have to be reduced. So in the context of that, we have seen the hydroelectricity project was also completely collapsed there, right? Displacement of the affected people, where you will displace them. Then loss of flora, that is plants, animals, and human being, right? So wild animals in that areas, birds in that areas, important vegetation in that areas. So all will be affected by that. Then psychological impact. The trauma will always be there in the mind when we see such events. So that psychological impact will be there in the context of such events. So these are referred as impact of the glacial lake outburst floods. Now next is National Disaster Management Guidelines for reducing the glacial lake outburst floods. Now the first one is identifying and mapping the dangerous lakes. Now the major idea is you should map the past events which have already occurred there, like 2013 events, 2012 events. So past events are to be done. Plus, we should always take the data of geomorphological and geotectonic lakes. You should make these lakes, which are geomorphological and geotectonic lakes. Tectonic lakes. Geotectonic means the lakes which are created by tectonic activity. Geomorphology means like oxbow lakes created by the rivers. So when the morphological characteristics are there, erosion and deposition, we refer that as geomorphological. That is exogenetic part. Geotectonic means the tectonic activities which creates the lakes. Then use of technology, synthetic aperture radar imagery. Now this synthetic aperture radar imagery, SAR, is very important. It always automatically detect the change in the water level. So this automatically detect change in water level of the lakes. Plus, it also something where we say that automatically detect change in the water level of the earth, of the lakes, and also identify new lake formation. Identify new lake formation. Right. Then here we talk about structural measures. Now, what type of structural measures are there? Now, in the context of structural measures here, one is that when huge amount of water is accumulated, allow the water to move very slowly so that the flash floods are reduced. So controlled breaching. Controlled breaching of glacial lakes. It is something like this. If this is a huge amount of water which is accumulated in the glacier, in the lake, now you make a small breakage there so that the water moves very slowly downward to avoid the flash floods. This is to avoid flash floods. And when the water is moving slowly, it will not be having much impact. That is one structural measure. Now, the second structural measure is when you are unable to make the temporary breakages, you can use the portable pump sets to pump the water. Pumping water. So pumping of the water. Now, when we say pumping of water, when the water is accumulated, so you remove the water. You remove the water either by using methodology or any type of technology through the tunnels, pumping water through tunnels. Is it clear? So, right. Now, this is something which you have to be known. Okay. So, we refer them as structural measures. One is controlled breaching of the glacial lakes, then pumping of water through the tunnels, then uniform code of construction activities. Now, when we talk about uniform code of construction, it is restricting the construction and development activities. Restrict the construction and development activities in the areas which are vulnerable, right? Restrict the construction and development activities which are vulnerable, and also avoid settlements there. Also avoid settlements. Right. Then enhance early warning system. Enhancing the early warning system. Then training of the local manpower. Now the training is given to them either in the form of first aid, or they are given the proper tools or toolkit like batteries, other essential elements which make them to utilize them. And these are given by experts like National Disaster Response Forces. National Disaster Response Forces, etc. So that the people will voluntarily involve in that. Voluntarily involved in that. So this is something which you should remember. NDMA guidelines for reducing the globs. See, when the glacial lake breaking is there, the moment when the glacial lake breaks, by default it will create flash floods, and that flash floods indicates that the glacial lake has already broken. So the event itself is a disaster. So how do you know? Means when the glacial lake breaks, tremendous amount of water moves downward in the form of flash flood. So flash flood is an indication of the breaking of glacial lakes. Then heat waves. This is something which is always seen in the context of that. Now heat waves is not uniformly calculated in different. So we have different definitions and different criterias in the context of heat waves. We have different definitions and different criterias which vary from one country to another country. They're not always the same. We always find different criterias because the variation of insolation is not uniform. At the equator, it is maximum, it decreases towards the poles. So you should remember this. Insolation is not uniform. Is not uniform. The tropical areas will be having more temperature. The polar regions will be having less temperature. So hence, you can't use the same criteria. It varies from place to place. That is one thing. Then, second perspective is that due to rapid urbanization and increasing population, we see rapid urbanization, increasing of the population, and industrialization. So all these activities are responsible for increasing large amount of greenhouse gases. greenhouse gases. And this is something which is responsible for global warming and climate change. Global warming and climate change. And apart from that, due to the global warming and climate change, the moment when we say the pattern, intensity, and frequency of heat waves have been changed due to global warming and climate change. The pattern, intensity, and frequency of the heat waves have been changed. Of heat waves have been changed. It means they are becoming more frequent. They are becoming more stronger. They are staying there for a longer period of a time here. So hence we find they are affecting these. Right? Now, when we talk about these perspectives, different definition and criteria. Now, in the context of India, if you see the vulnerability pattern, it is not uniform. In the context of India, if you see the vulnerability pattern, it is not uniform. Please keep this in the mind. In India, all the sections are having the impact of heat waves in different ways. Now, this is very simple to understand. If you see the urban and rural areas, the vulnerability profile is not the same. In the urban areas, it is very harsh. In the rural areas, it is less. So, urban people, we find more vulnerability. Then, if we take about rich and poor, so rich people will have their air conditioners, they will have their financial part. So rich people are less vulnerable in the context of heat waves, but the casualties will be more in the context of poor. So it is always seen in the rich and poor. Then it is also with reference to individual health, a healthy person and weak person. Healthy person and a weak person. Now, healthy person is having less vulnerability, but a weak person is high vulnerable for the heat strokes there. So hence vulnerability profile of India is not same. It always varies from place to place, time to time, and hence we always find there is degrees of resistance which varies. So hence in the context of India, the degree of resistance to heat waves varies. It is not uniformly seen. It varies from rural to urban, even in the population type, rich to poor, healthy to weak people. So this is some basic idea you should remember in the context of any answer you are writing in the heat waves. Now, the standard definition which is given for the heat waves as per World Meteorological Organization, it says that 5 or more consecutive days, continuously for 5 days or more, if the daily maximum temperature exceeds the average maximum temperature by 5 degrees Celsius. So if any region has average maximum temperature of 30 degrees centigrades, average temperature is 30 degrees. Now, if that area is experiencing a temperature of 36 degrees centigrades continuously for 5 days, we refer that as a heat waves according to World Meteorological Organization. average temperature exceeding to 5 degrees centigrade. We refer that as heat waves. And this always varies from one country to another because insolation is not uniform. And hence, the criterias are also different, definitions are also different. Now, in the context of India, we find mountains are there, coastal areas are there, plain areas are there. If we take Indian part, so we have coastal areas, we have mountains, we have plain areas, we have desert areas also. Now, in the context of India, it says that maximum temperature of a station reaches to 40 degrees or more in the plain areas like northern plains, etc. In the plain areas, if it reaches to 40 degrees centigrade, then we refer that as heat waves. In the coastal areas, if it reaches to 37 degrees centigrade, then we refer that as the heat waves. In the same way, in the mountain areas, hilly areas, if it reaches to 30 degrees centigrade, then we refer that as heat waves. Because in all the cases, we always find various types of impacts will be seen. Then, if you are talking about the departure from the normal, based on the departure from the normal, so heat waves, if that area is having a normal temperature of 30 degrees centigrade, if that area experiences a temperature which is 34.5 degrees to 36.4 degrees, then this area is said to have heat waves. Departure 4.5 to 6.4. And the same area, if it is more than 6.4, that is, if it is having 36.5 degrees, then we refer that as severe heat waves. Departure from that. So this is departure from the normal. So please remember this data. If they ask in the prelims, 4.5 to 6.4 is normal. Beyond 6.4 is severe heat waves. Severe heat waves. Then, based on actual maximum temperature for the plains, when the actual temperature of that area reaches equal to 45 degrees, then we refer that as the heat waves. Severe heat waves when the actual temperature is more than 45, we refer that as the heat waves. So this is deviation or departure from normal, and this is when the actual temperature reaches invariable. Even that region is having the average temperature of 43 degrees centigrade also. The moment when it reaches to 45 degrees, then we say it is heat waves. You don't have to wait to depart that for 4.6. So absolutely, when it reaches to 45, we refer that as heat waves. Right. So please read them and remember them. Sometimes they may ask in the prelims. Next, generally in the context of India, we always find the heat waves are dominant in the pre-monsoon days. Where we find the highest temperatures are there. Now this is mainly because of the reversal of the wind and the apparent shifting of the sun. Is that clear? So this is something which you should remember in the context of India. Pre-monsoon days, they are always high temperature. That is before the monsoon. In India, the southwest monsoon starts from June, July, August, and September, southwest monsoon. So before June, we have pre-monsoon which is having highest temperature. The wind patterns, apparent shifting of the sun makes the condition vulnerable. Right. Now next is favorable conditions for heat waves. What conditions make the heat waves dominant? Now this is again your geography part. One is when the heat waves from one region reaches to that areas. Transportation or prevalence of hot air over the region. So maybe from the desert that hot air reaches there. Maybe from some other elevated area it reaches there. So prevalence of hot air in that region. Because wind always moves from high pressure to low pressure. Right. So this makes the wind to move. So hot air moving in that area will always increase the temperature. So generally we refer that as impact of air masses. Impact of air masses. Next, absence of moisture in the upper atmosphere. So when there is absence of moisture in the upper atmosphere, so this moisture is responsible for decreasing of the temperature. But when the moisture itself is not there, then the temperature will increase very high. Moisture means it is amount of water vapor. Right. Then the sky should be practically cloudless. The sky should be practically cloudless. So whenever the skies are there, the skies are having the capacity of reflecting and absorbing also. They are having the capacity of reflecting, and they also have the capacity of absorbing. Right. Now, if the clouds are not there, maximum insolation will hit to the ground. If this is a ground, no clouds are there, maximum insolation will reach to that. Because the skies plays an important role in albedo. Right. Now, large amplitude of anticyclonic flow in that area. On this we have seen in many parts. If this is a desert area, anticyclone means the wind moves from center to outside. So divergence of the winds. So here we find divergent of the winds are there. So generally in the post-monsoon, in the pre-monsoons, we always find such types of incidents are there from the Rajasthan region. So anticyclones are developed in the Rajasthan regions where the local winds, they start moving towards the central India, towards the Delhi, and towards the other parts. So this divergent hot winds will increase the temperature where they reach. Right. So this is some rough idea you should remember. Right. At least read the basics. Right. So large amplitude of anticyclonic in that region. So these are the conditions, favorable conditions for the development of heat waves. Now, in the context of the heat waves, they use color codes. So please read this for your prelims. This will not be for your mains. The color codes will not be asked for the mains. So there they will talk about something. Yellow alert, avoid heat exposure, and its impact are given. Now, if it is orange alert, it means that this is a condition where severe heat conditions which persist for 2 days. And this is what you have read in your newspaper, right? So this is what you have read in your newspaper. Severe heat wave conditions which persist for 2 days. So many criteria are given. I have given you the general criteria. So that's why please read them carefully for your prelims parts. Right. So in this case, the necessity suggestions and actions should be done here. Then apart from that, we also have something called as red alert, extreme high temperature, extreme heat alert for the day, which can be more dangerous. And here It is something which can create heat strokes in all ages, which can lead to death or major injuries. So hence, extreme care is to be taken care whenever red alert is given. Right. So this is how the heat waves are analyzed in the context of India. That is Indian Meteorological Department and the analysis of the heat. So please read them. No explanation is required. Please read them. They are very simple to be seen. And these all are given by National Disaster Management Authority. Right. Now, measures to minimize the impact. Every day you read this. Every day you read this as a common part. That is, drink lemon water, reduce physical activities, take umbrellas, don't keep the pets in the cars. So all these are referred as that. So avoid going to the sun. Drink sufficient amount of water. Yes, the Maharashtra heat waves were red alert. The Maharashtra heat waves were red alert. They are mainly due to the weather phenomena which takes place there, due to changing of the wind patterns and changing of the precipitation patterns in that areas. Generally in Maharashtra, Telangana, we always find red alerts are there. Maharashtra generally in Marathwada region, which is a rain shadow region. And also Telangana, we find the heat waves are always seen there because of the wind patterns and because of its geographical location, right? So they also talk about different types of clothes which are using, right? So these are the normal points which you should keep in the mind. Avoid high protein food and do not eat stale food, right? The guidelines which have been given by them, please read them carefully. UPSC will not ask such a simple question. They may ask something different, but this is for your general part, because at present every part of India is experiencing heat waves. You can use these points to at least make yourself comfortable while reading. Drink oral rehydration syrups so that the body should not be much dehydrated, right? So these are the points which a common citizen takes place. Uranium power plant, not only uranium power plant, it is seen in many areas wherever large amount of greenhouse gas emission is done, wherever black carbon is being emitted. So all those areas we find the heat waves are dominant. Heat waves are dominant, right? Now, symptoms and first aid. This is sometimes with your basic common sense, and sometimes you can use them in your daily activities also. They will never ask you in the mains perspectives. Whenever heat rashes are there, these are the symptoms of that, and these are the first aid. Now, the idea of giving this is you don't have to search more on the topic. Please read these, they are more than sufficient. Please read this, that is more than sufficient. Don't make much search on that. Is it clear? So don't get much stress. I'm telling you that, I'm assuring you that you keep the PPTs as a reference point. That will help you a lot in the context of your preparation. It is an amalgamation of all the current and basic data. Right. So these are the things which you remember. Heat strokes, symptoms of heat strokes, what you should be doing this. Is that clear? So go through that very simply. Right. So these are the things which you should keep. So long-term measures will be planting more trees, reducing global warming. So they are all common sense questions. Restoring the water. So all the long-term measures will be almost all same. Nature-based solution, plant more trees so the animals will not be disturbed. Use more amount of groundwater so that the water accumulation will be there. Greeneries should be there. Restricting of the greenhouse gas emission. Clean energy should be used. So all these are long-term measures, right? You have to read them with your geography. You have to read with your geography. Without geography, you can't understand this. Right? Now, we always come across this, what we refer them as wet bulb temperature. Very important one. Now, what is this wet bulb temperature and what concepts are seen here? I'll try to explain that in a very simple terminologies. Wet bulb temperature. Now here, the moment when we talk about wet bulb temperature and all, we always talk about the term called as humidity. Humidity. Humidity means it is amount of water vapor which is present in the atmosphere. Now in geography, you have studied that humidity are of two types, absolute humidity and relative humidity. Amount of water vapor which is present in the atmosphere. Amount of water vapor which is present in the atmosphere, right? Apart from that, in general physics or general science, we have studied that there is a relationship between the evaporation and cooling of the body. So generally, body, it cools after evaporation. Cools after evaporation. Or we say, during the evaporation, the body cools. Evaporation means the sweating which he is seeing. The sweat which is released from the body. When you rub that sweat, you will have a cooling sensation. So evaporation decreases the body temperature, or evaporation brings cooling effect to the human body. Whenever evaporation is there, it cools the body. Right? So sweatings, removing that. So that's why when we put the fan increases the rate of evaporation. And by that, we will have the cooling effect on the human body. Right. So this is one you should remember. Now, if you take two towels, wet towel and dry towel, and if you have taken a bath, and if you rub your body with dry towel and wet towel, which towel will absorb more water from the surface of your body? Wet towel or dry towel? You have taken a bath, you are having two towels, wet towel and dry towel, right? Obviously, dry towel will absorb more amount of water. So it will remove more amount of water. So the moisture in the air is nothing but water vapor. So it means that if the air is having more moisture, or if the air is having less moisture, which air can dry the sweat on your body very faster? The dry air or the air which is having more moisture? Moisture means which is having amount of water vapor. Amount of water vapor, right? No, it means that the dry air will remove the surface of water very easily. So it means that if the water vapor increases in the air, if the moisture increases in the air, then will it increase the evaporation of body or it will decrease the evaporation of the body? I'm repeating. If the water vapor increases in the air increases. If the water vapor increases in the air, so what will happen to the rate of evaporation? Rate of evaporation of the body. Will it increase or decrease? Perfect. So the rate of evaporation will decrease. Now, when the rate of evaporation decreases, what will happen to the body? Will the body will be comfortable or will the body will have major issues? When the rate of evaporation decreases, what will happen to the body? Will it be comfortable or the human body will become uncomfortable when the rate of evaporation decreases? When the rate of evaporation decreases, what will happen to that? right? So when the rate of evaporation decreases, we always find that the body will have major issues. The body will be uncomfortable. The body will be uncomfortable. Why? Because the evaporation is not removed off. So this is something which has to be known. So more the moisture in the air, less the evaporation of the body. And then the body will have uncomfortability, which can lead to severe issues. Which can lead to severe issues. Is that clear? So this you should keep in the mind. Now linking this is wet bulb temperature. Now generally when we measure the temperature of an area, it is a temperature without saturation, without the moisture. The normal temperature when we measure, it is without humidity, without moisture. We don't take the consideration of the moisture. Sometimes it reaches to 40 degrees centigrade, sometimes it reaches to 45 degrees centigrade without the moisture. That is normal temperature, right? Now, if we take the thermometer, and you cover the thermometer by a cotton cloth which is dipped in a water. You dip the cotton cloth in the water, the cloth has become saturated with the moisture. You cover the thermometer with the cloth. You cover the thermometer with this cloth, cotton cloth, which is saturated with water. The thermometer is covered by the cloth which is saturated with the water. Now, the moment when you cover that, after that, the readings of the thermometers, the readings which you get in the thermometer is referred as wet bulb reading. So this reading is referred as wet bulb reading. It means it has taken the consideration of temperature plus moisture. So it is taking the consideration of temperature plus the moisture of the surrounding air, moisture or water vapor, right? So this is called as the wet bulb temperature. Now, the temperatures what we receive in the wet bulb, will it be same as the normal temperature? Which one will be higher? The normal temperature or wet bulb temperature will be higher? In a common observation, which temperatures will be higher? The normal temperatures or the wet bulb? Perfect. So the normal temperature will always be higher and the wet bulb temperature will always be lower because it takes into consideration of the moisture. Now, any area where the wet bulb temperature reaches to 30 degrees centigrade, any area where the wet bulb temperature reaches to 30 degrees centigrade, it means that this is the temperature where the body's rate of evaporation decreases. Now, when the body's rate of evaporation decreases, will the body be comfortable at 30 degrees centigrade? So body starts behaving uncomfortably from 30 degrees. So this temperature, which is 30 degrees centigrade to 35 degrees centigrade, is something which is dangerous for human life. So these conditions will have a huge impact. It can create heat strokes. It can have huge impact on the performance of human being. So this is what to be remembered. Is it clear? So the moment when the wet bulb temperature reaches to 30 degrees, so you should remember that the air has more saturation. The air has more moisture, and this moisture will reduce the evaporation of the body. It will reduce the evaporation, and by that, uncomfortability will be felt in the human body, which can lead to many losses. And Indian Meteorological Department not uses this criteria. That is the major problem. IMD do not uses this criteria. And this year, 2024, we have experienced that wet bulb temperature has reached to 31.5 in Maharashtra. It has crossed 31 degrees centigrade in Maharashtra. We don't know that we are undergoing a threat because of such conditions. So please remember the wet bulb temperature and its criteria, even though it is your geography, but still I have explained that. So normal temperature means when we calculate the temperature without taking into consideration of the saturation. If you remove the cloth and if you take the reading, that is normal temperature. If you cover the thermometer by a cloth which is saturated with the water, we refer that as wet bulb temperature. So taking the reading without the cloth is normal temperature, right? So 40 degrees is normal temperature. Remember, 40 degree is normal temperature. This is what we see in Maharashtra. 40 degree is normal temperature. The wet bulb in Maharashtra is 31.5 degrees, right? They are not implemented. So this you should remember. Why it is not used, they will never ask. But you should remember these perspectives. Now, whatever I have explained, it is seen here, right? So it is the lowest temperature to which air can be cooled by evaporation of the water at constant pressure. This evaporation is constantly happening from the skin through sweating, right? Which helps human cool when excess heat is there, right? So if there is high moisture in the atmosphere, this cooling down takes places at much space and it completely stops. And death. I've explained that and the same thing. So between 30 to 35 degrees, the human body, it undergoes hyperthermia. So hence it can lead to major impact, right? Now IMD has came up with two new terminologies. This is which has been given in the year 2024. Came up with two terminologies where it talks about heat stress exposure at the place. That is warm night condition and hot humid conditions. Warm night conditions and hot humid conditions. They were given last week itself, but they are not given clearly what it is. So please remember these two terms. One is warm night condition and hot humid weather, and they are not mentioned what these terms are. They are not clearly defined. That maybe next month they may give that, maybe another 2 months they may give the data, but at present we don't have any definition what is called as warm night condition and what is called as the hot humid weather. So these are the two terms were introduced IMD last week itself, when in the Maharashtra, where the wet bulb temperature reaches to 31.5 degrees. Wet bulb temperature in Maharashtra, it crosses 31.5 degrees centigrade. So please read them carefully. This can be your current affairs. This can be your general science. It can be asked in general science with reference to that. In India, when you take IMD do not consider the wet bulb temperature. So in your suggestion, you can give that next heat waves when we calculate, they have to consider wet bulb temperature. This is your suggestion, what you should use. Diana, you should put that very perfectly. You have asked that. So you should say that IMD should take the consideration of wet bulb. So this you can use as your conclusion when you are writing suggestions for that. At present, IMD do not uses wet bulb. So sometimes in prelims, they may ask wet bulb temperature 1, 2, 3, 4. So IMD do not uses that. Still, it is not using that, because unknowingly we are reaching to that stage. So that's why we find many heat strokes are there. So generally when we see the temperature around 35, 40, we don't know that what is the wet bulb temperature of that area. So it has to be seen as a proper perspectives there. So please remember these things, right? So please remember these things. Is it clear? So when you are sitting below the tree, that is not called as a wet bulb. So generally it is a shade of a tree which is giving. Moisture depends on all the surrounding area. It is not below the tree. It is surrounding all your area. It's our environmental perspectives. Please remember this. That cold waves. Now in the context of cold waves, heat waves we have seen, cold waves are also there. Right. So heat waves and also the cold waves are seen. Cold waves, the moment, no, they will never ask wet bulb introduced. So wet bulb introduced was in 1980s and 1990s. There has to be much research which has to be done. And moreover, this 30 to 35 is also something which has to be seen as a part, because insolation varies. If you keep the normal 30 to 35, it may not be scientifically correct. But at present, we are using 30 to 35 degrees centigrade of wet bulb as dangerous one. 30 to 35 is something which is dangerous one. They will not ask you in detail who introduced that. Right. Now, cold waves. The same what heat waves are there, we find the cold waves. Now, the criteria are minimum temperature of a station 10 degrees Celsius less for the plains or 0 degrees Celsius for hilly region. So the criteria will be the same. So it is when we talk about plains or when we talk about the hilly region. Because insolation varies, the wind patterns varies. We always know that insolation varies with latitude and altitude. So please use this as a reference. Insolation always varies with altitude, with latitude, and it also varies with time. Varies with time. So that's why we say the insolation varies temporally and spatially. Insolation varies temporally and spatially. That means it varies time to time. It varies from place to place. This is your basics geography. So, right. So as the insolation varies, then the heating effect will also be varying there. Right. Now next is departure from the minimum temperature. That is, in the heat waves, it is addition of 4.5. Now you reduce that, minus that values. In the heat waves, you have to add that. Here, if it is less than that, less than normal, right? It is referred as severe cold waves if it is less than 0.65. So remember, 4.5 to 6.5 is the standard deviation. If it is plus, then heat waves. If it is minus, then cold waves. Right. Now, based on actual minimum temperature, when the minimum temperature is less than or below, when the minimum temperature is more than or 0.4 degrees centigrade, 4 degrees centigrade, we refer that as cold waves. 4 degrees or above that, 4 degree above that. Severe cold waves, 2 degrees and above, 4 degrees and above, 2 degrees and above. Now these will not be asked in your mains, so these you should refer in the prelims. Now the major thing is, if you see the current affairs, we find that the February month of 2024 experienced severe cold. Now in the year 2024, India experienced severe cold, more specifically in the February, right? So we experienced very severe cold, more specifically Delhi, northwestern part of India, right? Now, what were the reasons for that? Reasons for 2024 cold. Now, the reasons which are given, many reasons are there. The cold wind from the Siberian part entered into India. The cold winds from Siberia region. That means cold wind from the north reached to the south. Siberian means it is north of India. North of India. So here, if you see India, right? So this is Siberia. This is north. So cold winds from north. Cold winds from Siberian region reached India. Then, second, absence of Western disturbances. So Western disturbances are the disturbances which are developed in the Caspian Sea or in the western side of India, which brings moisture and rainfall. And after the rainfall, the warm air will reduces the temperature. But here, the moisture itself was not there. The warm air from the Caspian Sea, Mediterranean Sea has not reached. So absence of Western disturbances. Absence of Western disturbances. Western disturbances. So generally these Western disturbances, they bring the moisture from the Caspian Sea, Mediterranean Sea. Generally we refer that as temperate cyclones in that part, right? Then third one is the impact of El Nino. Right. Now here El Nino was seen in the 2024 beginning stage. Impact of El Nino. Fourth, strong jet stream was there. Strong jet stream. Now what the strong jet stream? So this jet stream act as a blockage. It act as a blockage. Now this blockage is something which made an impact on making the cold winds to move downward. Right. So it helped in the subsistence of the cold wind. In the northwestern part of India. More specifically, the Delhi, Punjab, Haryana regions. So these were the reasons which were responsible for the extreme cold conditions which India experienced in the year 2024. Is that clear? So please remember this. Please reframe your statement. I can't read what is this. SYBOL. Please reframe your statements. Right. So this is what you should remember. The cold winds from Siberian region, absence of Western disturbances, impact of El Nino, strong jet stream in the northern part, which makes the subsistence of the cold winds. Generally in geography, such types of conditions in geography, we refer them as atmosphere blocking. Atmospheric blocking. Is that clear? So this you should remember. So when the Western disturbances are there, so Western disturbances, when we say Western disturbances brings the moisture. So the moisture will have certain temperature. They are evaporated water bodies. And whenever that region will have more amount of moisture, more amount of the temperature, more amount of moisture, or more amount of content there. So that can reduce the temperature. Sorry, that can enhance the temperature of the regions here. The moisture will enhance the temperature of that areas. Now, the absence of continuous western disturbances, they reduced the precipitation patterns in that areas, and that is where we find the ice deposit was also very, very less, and the wind patterns, they shifted somewhat in the northern side, which reduced the temperature of that areas. So this is again your geography part, moisture and related weather phenomena. Right. Now, in the context of India, if you see the cold conditions, the intensity of the cold waves have increased in frequency as well as its area of operation. So if you see this area, the northwestern part of India is the one which is most affected. Northwestern part which is most affected. Right. Most affected in that area. El Nino impact in the cold wave. So El Nino impact is the moment when we say El Nino affects the global wind patterns. The moment when we say El Nino affects the global wind patterns. So here global wind patterns means it talks about the changing of the wind direction, which led to the movement of the cold winds from Siberia to reach towards India. So in the context of El Nino, you don't have to read only about India. It affects all the phenomena of the world. So El Nino is a event which takes place in Pacific Ocean, but it affects the global wind pattern. Right. So we find the incidences are predominantly seen in the context of northwestern part of India. And sometimes we have witnessed that even in Telangana last 2022 and 2023. Is that clear? So please remember these things. You read your current affairs, which all areas are affected by the cold, and then you can frame your statements. Right. So this is a data which is from 2019. This is a generalized perspectives. Generalized perspective. Now, when we talk about the Ladakh region, so Ladakh region generally is covered with the ice. So the average temperature of that region will always be lesser. Right. So apart from that, many criteria are there. So this is something, a rough data which is given by Indian Meteorological Department from 1967 to 2019. Incidences of the cold waves. It is not uniform. It varies from place to place. Right. Now, when the impact of the cold waves are there, loss of life will be there. Agricultural crops are destroyed. Illness will be there. Transportation, because the cold waves, they will create a fog or sometimes disturb the transportation. They will affect the infrastructures. And whenever cold waves are there, we always consume more electricity, fuel and coal. So more energy consumption will be seen here. So these are the impact of cold waves. It is generally seen in human settlements with reference to agriculture, their life activities. Now, when we talk about the cold conditions, in the context of agricultural crops, they create many diseases. They are responsible for many diseases due to cold part, like black rust in the wheat, white rust in mustard, brown rust in barley, late blight in potato. So generally farmers will always have loss whenever we find such types of the disease, and they are always associated with the cold temperature. So agriculture productivity always defect with is associated with ideal temperature. Now when there is a change in the temperatures, this will always have an impact. Right. Now, in the same way, we have color codes for that. Color codes for that. Yellow alert and its condition. Orange alert, conditions. Red alert and its conditions. So please read them. Don't make much research. Just read them and keep them as a part of your prelims. Now, this year in prelims, they may ask because India is experiencing severe heat waves and already it has experienced cold waves in the month of February. Right now, this completes the heat waves and cold waves. So I think your queries are settled, Bimrai, Stephen, right? So whatever content, whatever issues were there, I tried with my knowledge to explain the things there. So we can have a break of 15 minutes, then we'll start the class at 8:05. We'll start the class at 8:05. Okay, welcome back after a break. So hope I'm audible as well as visible to you all, right? Now that's whatever content which I'm giving you through the PPTs, I think they will suffice the requirement of your basic approach in the context of disaster management. And if any current affairs are there, you should update that with your references, maybe from newspapers or maybe from something which are updated one. Maybe next month you may get something, or maybe after 2 months you may be having some important concept. You should update that with your current affairs and keep the PPTs as the reference point. They will help you a lot in your preparation. And these PPTs I have consolidated from many sources. Again and again, I'm telling you. So read the PPTs, make notes from referring the PPTs. It will help you in assessing the quality of answers. Now, next we move on to forest fires. Right. Now, forest fires. This we have already covered in ecology and environment. Now here we will be taking disaster management of that. Now forest fire is an important component. It is referred as an important component of forest ecosystem. And it is important component of forest ecosystem. It means it is advantage only if it is periodic and controlled. This forest fire is advantage only when this forest fire is periodic and controlled. And this we have explained in detailed in ecology and environment, right? So if it is periodic and controlled, then it is advantage. So these forest fires, they are generally, when we classify them, they can be natural or man-made. Natural and man-made. Now, in the context of man-made, it can be either due to error, or sometimes it can be because of certain types of the impacts where the human involvement is as a site of taking some enemy parts there. So we can say either it is due to error or maybe with some purpose, or we say deliberate. Apart from that, these forest fires, they are always named after the places in which they origin. These forest fires, they are always named after places where the forest fire has originated. Where the fire has originated. Like Bandarghatta forest fire, California forest fire, Himachal forest fires. So they are always named after the places where they originate. Next, so these forest fires, they become dangerous. These forest fires, they become dangerous when they are uncontrolled. And when they are in the season when the vegetation is dry. When the vegetation is dry, it means it will make the fire to spread very fast. When the winds are stronger, so in these conditions, the forest fire become more dangerous, which destroys everything in the form of blazes. Right. So this is some rough idea about the forest fires. Now, when we talk about the forest fires, it can be ground fire, surface fire, and ground fire. Ground fire means sometimes the peat areas are affected. Peat areas are affected, or the subsurface vegetation is affected. Then the surface means generally above the ground, where the bushes and the weeds get burned. So we refer this as surface area or surface fire. Now, when we talk about ground and surface, so this ground fire and surface fire can be controlled. Can be controlled. So these can be controlled. But when the forest fire catches the canopy, the leaves, we refer that as crown fire. When it catches to the canopy, we refer that as crown fire. Now, this crown fire is something which is difficult to control. Difficult to control. Like Amazon forest, Australian bushfires. Example, Amazon forest fire, the bushfires of Australia, right, where they burned for 15 days, 20 days, etc. Very difficult to control them, where they spread very fast, So three types of forest fires are there: crown, surface, and ground one. So please remember these. Right. Okay. Now next is the reason behind that. So this is a natural one. And deliberate means with purpose. Accidental means error. Error. So you don't have to write in detail about that. You should remember natural example, lightning. Deliberate, like shifting cultivation or encroaching. Accidental, like this. So you don't have to define them in detail. So the reason for the forest fires are natural and man-made. Is it clear? So please read them. Right. Now next, impact of the forest fires. One is it will add pollution, because whenever the forest fires are there, whatever carbon dioxide stored in the forest is re-emitted back. So they re-emit. They re-emit the stored carbon dioxide, which is a greenhouse gas. Right. Plus, they also emit what we refer them as brown carbon, because forest fire is a biomass burning. So they emit brown carbon. And these greenhouse gases, these brown carbons, and other smokes which are released by that, they become a pollutant when their concentration increases. They become pollutant where their concentration increases, which becomes a health hazard there. Then, whenever the forest fires are there, the timbers are destroyed, the forest products, minor forest products are destroyed, other types of economic actively productive stabilities were destroyed. So hence, it will make livelihood loss for the forest dwellers. Livelihood means employment opportunities will be lost there. So it will create a problem for their food or job. Loss of biodiversity. Whenever forest fires are there, trees will be burnt. Wild animals which are there in the forest areas, like kangaroos in the context of Australian bushfires, many giant eaters, many leopards, many cheetahs, all they get burned there. So we find loss of biodiversities are there, trees and animals. So animals, they will have burn or they will lead to death. Then loss of life and property. So huge properties are destroyed here, maybe in the form of timber. Maybe we find the settlements are there. The fringe communities, the areas where the settlements are there. So they will always have the loss of their own settlements. Now, whenever forest fires are there, the wild animals like leopard, cheetahs, they leave the forest and enter into residential. The wild animals like leopard, cheetahs, etc., they leave the forest and enter into settlement. And which creates man-animal conflict. Which is one of the reasons for the loss of biodiversity. Global warming, increasing of this carbon dioxide, is something which creates the global warming. Because if the forests are greenery, then they are referred as carbon sink. So burning of forest fire make them carbon emitter. So when the forest burn, we refer them as carbon emitter. It accelerates other disasters. Like if there is a continuously forest fires are there, that forest fire can lead to something called as loss of vegetation, and loss of vegetation can lead to landslides in the forest areas. That can lead to landslides. Or sometimes when the vegetation is completely burnt off, it can create drought-like conditions. So it accelerates the other disasters. So these are referred as the impacts of the forest fires, right? Then forest fires in India. There has been a 46% increase in the forest fire from 2003 to 2017, continuously increasing of forest fires. 90% of the forest fires are man-made. So it means out of 46%, 90% are man-made. Now these man-made are due to error or maybe deliberate. So it can be due to error or it can be deliberate. Error means sometimes when there is a issue associated with urbanization, or sometimes when the tourist reaches to the forest area, a cigarette is thrown by them, or short circuit takes place in the forest area. We refer that as error. Deliberate means shifting cultivation. Example, shifting cultivation. Is that clear? So please remember this. Then more than 50% of geographical area is affected by forest fire. Out of the total area of India, 50% is affected by forest fires. Why? Because India depends on monsoon rainfall. So variation in the monsoon will always have impact on the vegetation. Northeastern and central India is worst affected by the forest fire. Right. So when we talk about this northeastern and central India, it is mainly because of shifting cultivation. See, cigarette smoking, it can be error, it can be deliberate also. Deliberate means purposefully when it throws. When you see in the old Hindi movies, we find a person smokes and throws it purposefully, right? So in that case, we can say it is deliberate. Now, sometimes when we do that, non-intentionally, you throw the cigarette without making a proper disposal. So that can also create the error, right? Now, fire season in the context of India is February 14 to May 15. Now, this is where you should remember this fire season in the context of India is during pre-monsoon. Right. So in the pre-monsoon, heat waves are there. So please remember that February to May, pre-monsoon, heat waves. So pre-monsoon, we find the temperature is very high and the vegetation is dry vegetation. Now, whenever dry vegetation is there, then the forest fire catches very easily. And generally in the pre-monsoon showers, we always find lightning impact will be there. Lightning impact will also be there, right? So this is something which you should remember. Fire seasons. Non-intentionally will be error and intentionally will be deliberate. Yes, non-intentionally means errors and deliberately means yes, right? So intentionally means deliberate. So the meaning itself is the same. Perfect. So monsoon is the primary determinant of forest fires in India. Now, monsoon means it is a southwest monsoon we are talking about. Southwest monsoon. So this southwest monsoon starts as an ideal date is June 1st. Ideal date is June 1st. Right. Now this southwest monsoon, when it takes place ideally, then it will bring moisture, it will bring the water, then the dry vegetation will become wet. So it will become wet condition. And wet condition is difficult to catch the fire. So hence in the context of India, monsoon primary determines the fire season in India. If there is delay in the monsoon, if there is delay in the southwest monsoon, what will happen to the fire incidences in India? Will they increase or will they remain same? If there is delay in the southwest monsoon, then what will be the impact of delay in the monsoon in the India's forest? They will always increase. And that's why when the monsoon is delayed, we find the Himachal Pradesh will have forest fires, Northeastern will have forest fires, Assam forest fires, Uttarakhand forest fires. Why? Even though they get heavy rainfall, but still during the pre-monsoon or when there is a delay in the monsoon, they will always increases the fire. So this delay will increase the forest fire. Now, if there is an early southwest monsoon, then it will have an impact which can reduce the forest fires. Early monsoon will reduce the forest fires. Delayed monsoon will increase the forest fires. Right. So hence, monsoon is the primary determinant of the season in India. Then we have Keith-Byram drought index, which is used to provide the early warning systems of the forest fires. So this index is used to determine the forest fire. Now they will never ask you how the Keith-Byram drought index work. They will never ask you. If they ask, you should remember Keith-Byram drought index is something which is used to determine the possibility of forest fires. Is that clear? Determine the possibility of forest fire. So this is some rough idea about the forest fires in India. Now, if you see the incidences of forest fires in India, if you see the data, the northeastern side of forest fires are mainly because of shifting cultivation, or because of delay in monsoon, or because of droughts, Now, if you take the central part of India, the central part of India receives forest fires because of the drought area, as it is a region which receives less rainfall. It receives low rainfall or less rainfall. Apart from that, in the eastern side, we also find shifting cultivation is there. Shifting cultivation. Then if you see the Western Ghats, in the Western Ghats, we find again it is due to shifting cultivation or man-made activities like mining activities, or sometimes deforestation in that areas. Now the same you can find in the Himachal and Uttarakhand. It is due to delay in the monsoon or due to drought. So hence we find India is vulnerable for the forest fires. Keith-Barham drought index also uses droughts. They can be used to define the droughts, but more specifically, we use them in identifying the forest fires. They can be used for droughts as well because it itself talks about the precipitation patterns and dryness. So we can use them, but the more appropriate index which is used to measure the drought is Palmer drought index. The more appropriate is Palmer drought index. So this is about the vulnerability profile in India. What type of forest fires are seen? So please remember this. They may ask questions on these. It can be in your mains or it can be in the prelims. Why India is vulnerable for forest fires? So we have to give them deforestation, mining activities, shifting cultivation, right? So these things you should keep in the mind, right? Now, next is in the context of India, the Forest Survey India. FSI means Forest Survey India. A nodal agency. It monitors the forest fires on two satellite platforms. One is moderate resolution imaging spectrometer, that is MODIS, and second one is SNPPV-IRS, that is visible infrared imaging radiometer suite. And they all provide the data which are very, very important in pre-disaster management. And they also plays an important role in identifying the possible areas. Where we can make the rescue and rehabilitation to reach faster. So please remember this. Now, next is forest fire management in India. So this is something which can be asked in the mains examination, as Indian forests are always vulnerable in the context of the present condition. Keep them as simple as possible. Don't elaborate them. Indian Forest Act 1927. It has says the criminal offenses to burn or allow fire in the reserved and protected areas. So legal protection is given to that. Right. Then apart from that, while maintaining the forests, while defining about the forests, so their United Nations international perspectives are also taken into consideration. Right. So United Nations also focuses on this. Then Section 30 of Wildlife Act of 1970 prohibits setting fires in wildlife sanctuaries. So again, legal protection is given. Then clearance of forest lines and conduct controlled burning. Clearance of forest lines and conduct controlled burning. Now the reason behind this is when the forest lines are cleared, so it will make the movement of the personnel very easy. So the personals who are involved in the disaster management, they move very freely. Fast movement will be there. Right? And controlled burning. If any area is having dead stock, if you burn that with the control, then there will not be much problem. So controlled burning has to be done, like controlled breaching, which we have done in the context of gloves. So controlled burning is done here. Then it also talks about something called as silviculture. Silviculture, it is the trees are densely arranged in the forest areas. You thin them so that the connectivity is destroyed. So selective thinning and planting the fire resistant plants. Generally in the forest areas, we find densely forests are there. Densely forests are there. You make thinning of that. You make thinning of that so that the forest fire will not spread. So it is reducing the spread. Reducing the spread. Now, planting fire resistant plants so that they can recover quickly after the fire. So that they can recover quickly. Right. So fragmentation means you are reducing them. You are reducing the continuous. So generally we see the areas which are most vulnerable for forest fires, we make thinning of that so that it will not spread outside. So rather than fragmentation, we say selective thinning. Fragmentation is a term used for lands. So fragmentations of the forest area, right? Then early warning and fire danger rating systems are required. Early warning and fire danger systems are required so that they can help in the pre-disaster management. So we always talk about something called as real-time monitoring is required. Real-time monitoring, which gives about exact area and exact location. Then dry firefighting and techniques. Generally, we refer them as bush fightings. So generally, this is seen in the areas where the surface forest fires are there, or where we find ground forest fires are there. In both these cases, a bush is taken, and then with the local people, you can hit that on the ground. So we refer that as dry fighting techniques. So they are generally used to control the surface and ground forest fires, not the crown. Crown cannot be controlled by dry fighting techniques. Then we have something called as the National Action Plan on Forest Fire. Now this is very important. National Action Plan on Forest Fire. NAP. Right. Now what is this National Action Plan on Forest Fire? Now this National Action Plan on Forest Fire, it gives incentives to work with forest official. It gives incentives to work with forest officials. Right. So if the local people are given some incentives in the form of monetary benefit, or when they are allowed to do some agriculture activities, then they will combine their efforts with the forest official, by which they can reduce the impact of the forest fire. So the National Action Plan for Forest Fire is giving incentives to the local people, so that they can work with the forest official and reduce the impact of drought. Now, minimizing the forest fire by using local communities. Fringe communities means the local people, the tribal peoples. If you provide them certain amount of financial assistance, certain amounts of land for their agriculture, then definitely they will be involved. So hence, it gives incentives to the local people to work and reduce the impact. Now, the principles of National Action Plan are guide and assist for holistic management of forest fire. Now here it should be a combined aspect. Holistic means everybody should be combined there. So it is the combination of policymakers, coordination is required. Policymakers should combine with the administrators, policymakers, administrators, and the local people, which we refer them as civil societies. So they should be combined, and holistic approach is important. Second, prevent forest fire and improve resilience. Now always remember, the term resilience has two parts. The first part of resilience means it talks about resistant. Resist the forest fire. We refer that as resistancy. The second is, in spite of resistance, if that tree, if that forest is burnt, it should recover quickly. It should recover quickly. So these two terms combinedly referred as resilient. The moment when you're writing resilience, it should have two scopes. Either it should be resistant. While resisting, if it is destroyed, it should recover very quickly. So the moment when you write resilience, you should remember you are talking on two terminologies: resistance along with quick recovery against the hazard. So prevent the forest fire and improve resilience in that. Now, when we talk about that, you should always take care of the biodiversities. So protect the biodiversities. Protect the biodiversity so that they can restrict, they can resist and recover quickly. Then safety of the people. Now, safety of the people, the moment when we say high priority should be given to the residents of that area, the local people. High priority for the residents. High priority should be given to the residents. That is local people of that area. Then there should be a clear line of command. So when there is a clear line of command is given, when you assign the work to one particular group of people, when you assign that this is the activity which you have to perform, so it means that it will increase the responsibility, and along with the responsibility, it will increase the accountability. When the clear line of command is there, it does two things. It provides, or it increases the responsibility. Second, it increases accountability. Accountability. It means if you have assigned something to that person, and if that person is not done the work, then you can catch him and ask why it has been not done. So hence, clear line of command will help in increasing the responsibility and increasing the accountability. Accountability. Then next, they talk about bring the district as a basic unit. Reduce the area so that effective planning is done. So that effective planning is done. If it is smaller in the region. So hence we have district disaster management authorities. District disaster management authorities, right? Next, it also talks about the fire risk zonation and mapping. Now, why this fire risk zonation and mapping is done? So generally in the context of this forest fires, we don't know what reasons are there, and we don't know exact data of that. So these maps, which are framed often and often, they should be reviewed and updated. So these maps, they should be reviewed and updated periodically. periodically. Because 5 years back map will not help you. 10 years before the data will not help you, because maybe many changes have been seen there due to change in the landfall patterns, due to change in other factors. So hence, you should always update that. You should always update the maps. Create awareness and effective communication. The same thing what we have done in the other part. So it is very important aspect of pre-disaster management. Then forest biomass management. Biomass means the dead stock. The dead stock, like the dead trees, leaves, etc. So if you burn them slowly, then they will not trigger the major threat. Weed management. So weed management means the small amount of grasses which can make the spreading of forest. So when you manage the weed, then the spreading is reduced. Spreading is reduced. Weeds means the small grasses, the small shrubs which are there. Then always make sure that we have to update in the preparedness. We should always update in the form of technologies or in the form of information which are persisting there. Now, this is generally seen in digitalization of forest boundaries. The boundary should be digitalized so that it will give certain accuracy. Then adopt forest fire alert system. Right. So for adapt forest fire alert system, and this we have already been using, which provides real-time monitoring of forest fires. Real-time monitoring. Right. So generally, it is referred by something called as FAST. Forest alert system. Right. So we are using FAST 3.0, which provides real. 3 means the third version. Version 3. Third version we are using. Improve ground-based detection, and then also strengthen the engagement with local communities. So that's why where we call about the work of Apad Mitras or Apada Mitra. Apada Mitra. Voluntarily, the people involved, involvement of people will be there. Awareness and all. Right. So all these are very, very important. Now, sometimes we use apps also. Mobile apps which disseminate the knowledge. So all these are very important. Alert systems, preparedness, which talks about controlling the risk in the beginning itself. So these all are referred as the National Action Plan for Forest Fire. If UPSC asks the question, you have to remember these plus these. So these all are referred as the National Action Plan in the context of forest fire perspectives. Now, in the current affairs, we have something called as United Nations Forum on Forest. Now, this was established in 2000 by United Nations Economic and Social Council. So this is for your prelims. And India is founding member of that. India is founding member of that. So it means India is also actively involved in that, founding member of that. Then United Nations General Assembly adopted the first ever United Nations Strategic Plan for Forest for the 2017 and 30. Now, this is a global framework like UNFCCC, United Nations Framework Convention for Climate Change. Now, same type of framework is there to maintain the forest cover, make sure the forest fires and all are not increasing. Then in the context of India, MOEFCC, Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, has organized something called as CLI, country-led initiatives, in the year 2023. And apart from many activities, the major idea of this is to make awareness about forest fire, to create awareness and control forest fire by involving community. Involving community. Right. So this is how the current affairs can also be asked. United Nations Forum on Forest. Who established that? In prelims, it is UNECS, that is United Nations Economic and Social Council. India is its founding member. Yes. Along with 12 countries, India is also part of that. So these all data are very important when you are taking up your prelims examination. Right. So don't get much stressed. Accumulate whatever is there with you. Organize your reading. Then it becomes easy for you to manage that. Now, next we move on to tropical cyclones. And this you have already done in your geography. Just a recap of the terminologies. It's an irregular wind which rotates around the low pressure center over and above the earth due to atmospheric disturbances and rotation of the earth. So remember, the tropical cyclones are within these Tropic of Cancer and Tropic of Capricorn. They are referred as cyclones, or they are referred as hurricanes, or they are also referred as typhoons. All the three names are the same. All the three names are same, which are generally seen in between Tropic of Cancer and Tropic of Capricorn. And here they all are formed as temperature is the criteria. Higher temperature, average temperature of around 27 degrees centigrade is required. So temperature is the major criteria for development of tropical cyclones. So hence, tropical cyclones are also referred as thermal in origin. Thermal in origin. And they always rotate anti-clockwise in the northern hemisphere. In the northern hemisphere, they rotate anti-clockwise. And in the south, they rotate clockwise. They rotate clockwise. So north and southern hemisphere, anti-clockwise, clockwise. Right. Now, here you should understand certain terminologies associated with the tropical cyclones. Only with the tropical cyclones. Right. So these tropical cyclones, they develop only on the water bodies, not on the land. They develop only on water bodies, like sea, ocean, etc. Sea, ocean, etc. They develop mandatory on the water bodies. They don't produce on the land areas. They develop only on the water bodies, not on the land areas. Right. So this process where they develop, generally it starts with the low pressure, and this low pressure becomes stronger. And when it makes stronger, it takes few days, 1 day, 2 days, 3 days to increase its strength. So when the low pressure becomes stronger, we refer this process as intensification of tropical cyclone. Intensification of tropical cyclones. So this takes days time. So it can be 2 days, 3 days, etc. So slowly it becomes stronger. And we refer that as mature tropical cyclone. Mature tropical cyclone. And the moment when the mature tropical cyclone is there, so this tropical cyclone will have eye, it will have eye wall, it will have feeder band or rotation band. Feeder or rotation band. Right. And these cyclones, they always have strong vertical clouds. We refer them as cumulonimbus clouds. Cumulonimbus clouds. Cumulonimbus clouds will be there. Right. Now, apart from that, when we talk about the tropical cyclones, the life of tropical cyclones, the life where they develop, they mature and dissipate. Life means where they develop, where they mature. Mature means intensify. And disseminate, dissipate, end. Or end of that. So we refer that as life of tropical cyclone. So this life of tropical cyclone average is 3 to 10 days. 3 to 10 days. Average life is 3 to 10 days. But exceptional are there. Exceptional are there. Now, this exceptional is mainly due to global warming and climate change. So please keep this in the mind. So because of global warming and climate change, the lives of the tropical cyclones have also been altered. Their life is also altered. Now, this is where we have seen the classical example is in the year 2023. A cyclone called as Freddy cyclone. This Freddy cyclone was developed in the South Indian Ocean. South Indian Ocean. It survived in the ocean for a longest ever recorded life of a tropical cyclone, which stayed for 37 days. Which stayed for 37 days. Longest ever. Now, this is in the South Indian Ocean. South Indian Ocean. Now, here we are having India, right? And this is equator. This is equator. This is called as North Indian Ocean, which includes the Bay of Bengal. Sorry, we have Bay of Bengal and Arabian Sea. North Indian Ocean includes Bay of Bengal and Arabian Sea. And this region is referred as North Indian Ocean. North Indian Ocean. Now, if you see this Freddy cyclone developed in the Australia, and after developing here, it reached to African coast. It reached to African coast. African coast. And it stayed for 37 days. Record number of the days. So it is the highest part. Now, what happens when the cyclone stays in the ocean for a longer period of a time? So when it stays for a longer period of a time, it will absorb more moisture. And when it absorbs more moisture, then it becomes high latent heat. Then it becomes more dangerous. because it will be having high latent heat or high latent energy, right? So when we talk about this, so remember, one is North Indian Ocean. Apologies, this is South Indian Ocean. South Indian Ocean. SOI means South Indian Ocean. South Indian Ocean. So Freddy cyclone was in the South Indian Ocean, north, not in the north. So North Indian Ocean includes Bay of Bengal and Arabian Sea. SOI means South Indian Ocean. So here the first term is intensification and the life of tropical cyclone, which stays there, right? So we have many events which have been seen. Apart from that, apart from this, we also have certain type where we talk about the tropical cyclone. More specifically, the third term is these tropical cyclones, they are developed on the water bodies and they take a path of parabolic. So their path is parabolic. This is general path. Parabolic means something like this. Parabolic. And by taking the parabolic path, they reach the land area. They reach land area or they enter the land area. When they enter the land area, we refer that as landfall of a tropical cyclone. Landfall of the tropical cyclone. It is something like this. This is a continent or this is a land area. And here you are having the water body. Large water bodies there. And here the cyclone is developed. Now the cyclone, when it enters into the land, we refer that as landfall of tropical cyclone. And the moment when the landfall is there, what will happen during the landfall? The first, it will bring heavy rainfall. The cumulonimbus clouds will provide heavy rainfall. Second, as it is having steep pressure gradient, the tropical cyclone will always have steep pressure gradient. Steep pressure gradient. So because of that, high velocity winds will be there. Winds of very high velocity. Third, it can make flooding in the coastal area. Floods in the coastal areas. So these events, heavy rainfall, winds, and the floods, which bring socio-economic losses. Which brings socio-economic losses. In the term of deaths, injuries, loss of property, etc. Right. So landfall of tropical cyclone is something which is associated with the disaster. So this is something which is referred as a hazard. And this, if it is not controlled, then it will become a disaster. It will become a disaster. So please remember these terminologies. Right. Now, apart from that, when the tropical cyclone makes landfall, after that it enters into another water body. It enters into another water body. Then we refer that as re-intensification. It is something like this. It is something like this. You are having a land area and this is a water body. Water bodies. Now here the tropical cyclone has developed. So when it enters into land area, we refer that as landfall of tropical cyclone. So 90% of the cyclone, or we say 95 to 99% of the tropical cyclones end their life end their life after landfall. 99% of the tropical cyclones end their life after landfall. But there is possibility that a cyclone can cross the land if this land is narrow. If the land stretch is narrow, this tropical cyclone can cross that and enter into another water body. And we refer that as re-intensification. Re-intensify. Again, it will gain strength. And after gaining the strength, it will reach to another land, and then again it will make a second landfall. So these are the dangerous events which are seen in the context of tropical cyclone. Now, if you see the cyclone Freddy, the Freddy tropical cyclone, it made very huge records. The first record is it stays for 37 days. The second is it made 3 landfalls. It made 3 landfalls. It means it re-intensified 2 times. Re-intensified and made landfalls. A very unique type of the event associated with the Freddy cyclone. Freddy cyclone. So please remember this. 37 days, landfall and re-intensified. Right. Now, apart from that, in the present context, the tropical cyclones are becoming very strong within a short period of a time. It means they are intensifying. They are intensifying in 24 hours. These tropical cyclones, they are intensifying, or they are becoming very strong in very short period of a time. In very short period of a time, where their wind velocity exceeds very high. And such tropical cyclones, which intensifies, become strong in 24 hours or less than 24 hours. Less than 24 hours. We refer that as rapid intensification. We refer that as rapid intensification. And this rapid intensification is a cause of a concern, because yesterday the forecaster says that the wind velocities will be somewhere around 40 kilometers per hour. Suddenly the next day the wind velocity reaches to 200 kilometers per hour. So that will become dangerous to manage that. So this becomes a difficulty in disaster management. Difficulty in disaster management, because yesterday you are telling that the wind velocities are 50 kilometers per hour, 70 kilometers per hour. But suddenly overnight, the wind velocities have increased to 150 kilometers per hour. Why? Because the sea surface temperature of the ocean, SST means sea surface temperature of the oceans, have increased due to large amount of carbon dioxide entering there. SST means sea surface temperature of the oceans have increased, because oceans are referred as carbon sink. Oceans are referred as carbon sink. And this sea surface temperature provides large amount of evaporation, and that evaporation adds latent heat, moisture, which makes the tropical cyclones to become very, very dangerous. We refer that as rapid intensification. So please remember these terminologies when you're reading your cyclones, reading your tropical cyclones, right? Now, as I told, they are referred as hurricanes, cyclones, and typhoons in different basins. Different. So latent heat is the hidden heat. Latent heat is hidden energy. Hidden energy. Now, hidden energy means, see, if this is an ice, when you heat that, you are providing certain energy in the form of calories. So when you provide the energy in the form of calories, this ice will melt in the form of water. So it will be there in the water only when it is having certain calories, around 80 calories of heat with that. So this 80 calories of heat which is there in that water is its hidden energy, called as latent heat. Now when you heat this water, you are providing around 608 calories of heat to that. So this water will convert itself into water vapor. It will convert itself into water vapor. So this water is in the state of gaseous. Why? Because it is having the amount of energy which is stored inside that, which is referred as latent heat or latent energy. So this invisible amount of energy which is stored, which makes the body to change from one state to another state, is referred as latent energy or latent heat. Now, if you see the ice, water, and the steam, in the steam, the latent energy is very high. So that's why the storms are more dangerous. That's why they are more dangerous, because of the amount of energy there. Now, if you take the example of the hot water and steam, which one will have more burning sensation? Hot water or steam? Which will burn highest? If you are taking hot water and the steam, a burn from hot water and the burn from steam, which one will be dangerous? Right? Steam will be dangerous. Why? Because it is having high latent energy. It is having high amount of energy. And this energy which is hidden is referred as latent heat. Is that clear now? So the storms, cyclones all have the water vapor, which is having the highest amount of the latent energies. And this latent energy is something which makes the cyclones more dangerous one. Right? So we refer that as the latent heat. Yes, latent heat of vaporization. If you remove that latent heat, if you take the water vapor, if you remove that latent heat, what will happen to that gaseous body? If you remove that latent heat, if you remove that temperature, if you remove that energy from the water vapor, what will happen to that? The water vapor will become cool and it will convert itself into liquid. We refer that as a process of condensation. And again, if you reduce the temperature of water, then it will become ice. We refer that as condensation. So removing of latent energy makes the object to undergo condensation. Adding of latent energy makes the object to undergo evaporation. That is called as latent heat of evaporation, and this is called as latent heat of condensation. These are all your geography tasks. And if I keep on explaining these terms, then it becomes very difficult for me to complete my disaster management. Is that clear? Okay. Now, next is in the context of India. In the context of India, Indian Meteorological Department, IMD, when we talk about that. So here IMD classifies the cyclones on the basis of its wind velocity. If the wind velocity is more than 63 kilometers per hour, then we refer that as cyclone. If the wind velocity is more than 221, then we refer that as super cyclone. But in the context of hurricanes, they are classified not on the basis of extremely or cyclonic. They are classified on the basis of scale called as Saffir-Simpson. So hurricanes are classified on the basis of Saffir-Simpson scales. This is your prelims, right? So if the wind velocity in the Saffir-Simpson scale is 119 to 153, it will have a minimum damage. If it is 154 to 177, then it is category 2. Category 2. And if it is wind velocity of more than 252, or if it is more than 221, we refer that as super cyclone, or we refer that as the category 5, right? So this is something which you should remember. So whenever category 5 or extreme severe or super cyclone is there, it destroys everything. The roofs and all will be removed off. It is something where you have seen in TV ad also, where we say, a lady says, "Sab kuch to ud gaya, only fog, the smell is left out," right? So that is severe wind impact, right? So the ad, I don't remember which exactly that ad is, where the lady says that "Sab kuch ud gaya," only that smell is, right, regarding fog, I guess, right? So that is where everything is removed off. The roofs, tops, everything will be removed off, right? So this is what you should remember. Now in exam, don't mention that fog, but remember that it is an intensity where everything get destroyed. Is that clear? So we refer them as the category 5, or we refer them as extreme severe cyclones, right? Okay. So this is some rough idea about, right? Now generally you should always read the subject with some humor. If you keep on reading with some seriousness, you will not by heart. You should have certain humor in reading. You should also spend some time so that your mind, your energy rejuvenates there, right? So you should take a break and then you should read them, so that rejuvenation has to be there. Now, when we talk about the number of tropical cyclones in the global perspective, in the global perspectives, this you already have the data, but understand, on the global perspective, Bay of Bengal, Arabian Sea, they are in the Indian Ocean, North Indian Ocean, then South Indian Ocean, then Pacific Ocean, then Atlantic Ocean, right? So if you are calculating the yearly global tropical cyclones, 10% of the tropical cyclones every year, I'm talking about average, 10% will be there in Bay of Bengal, average annually. 3% will be in Arabian Sea, right? So here, if it is 6, then it will be 2. Then South Indian Ocean, 6 cyclones. South Indian Ocean, 6 cyclones. Northeast Pacific, 16% of the total. Northwest Pacific, Japan, China, etc. Northeast means California, that west coast of North America. This portion, that is the northeast of Pacific. Northwest of Pacific includes China, Japan, etc. Now remember, which has 36% of that. So Northwest Pacific is most vulnerable for tropical cyclone. Most vulnerable for tropical cyclone. Japan, China, and the neighboring areas there. Then South Pacific. Now if you take this data, the Pacific Ocean is something which is having the highest number of tropical cyclones. The Pacific Ocean has highest tropical cyclones. And within the Pacific, the Northwest Pacific is most dangerous one. So we see typhoons in China, we see typhoons hitting to the Japan, and this is also the region where we find earthquakes are dominant, volcanoes are dominant. So hence Northwestern Pacific is most vulnerable for natural disasters. It is most vulnerable for natural disasters. So please keep these data in your mind when you are reading. So refer that through the maps. Right? These are the facts which you should keep in the mind. Right? Now, because of global warming, as the latent heat is increasing, now I think this point will be easy. There could be 5% increase in the cyclonic winds, by which the number of tropical cyclones will increase. So because of global warming, the tropical cyclones are increasing in the number. And they are not only increasing, they are becoming severe. They are gaining more strength. And they are not only becoming severe. They are not only intensifying, they are rapid intensifying. They are undergoing rapid intensification. Right. So what is rapid intensification? When the velocity of that cyclone increases to at least 55 kilometers per hour in 24 hours, we refer that as rapid intensification. Suddenly its velocity increases to 55 kilometers per hour, and we refer that as rapid intensification. Rapid intensification. So these are something which are associated with global warming and climate change, because oceans are referred as major carbon sink, and because of large amount of carbon dioxide which is entering into the ocean, the sea surface temperature of oceans are becoming very warmer. The sea surface temperature, always remember, SST means sea surface temperature. Even of the oceans we refer that as SST, sea surface temperature. Sea surface temperature, which makes the conditions most vulnerable. Is that clear? Now, in the context of India, the vulnerability profile, India vulnerability, right, of the total coastline, which is 7,516 kilometers. Of the total coastline of 7,516 kilometers, 5,700 kilometers is vulnerable to floods, cyclones, etc. So this is vulnerability profile of India. 5,700 kilometers is vulnerable for cyclones. Now, apart from that, if you take the vulnerability profile of India, generally in the pre-monsoons and post-monsoons, the number of cyclones will be very high. But in the monsoons, they will be less because of less wind shearing in the pre-monsoon. During the monsoon, wind shear is maximum. During the monsoon, the wind shear is more. Wind shear, it means it changes the wind direction. Wind shear means the wind changes its directions in the short distance. Shearing means changing its direction. So when the wind changes its direction, then how it can rotate? If the wind do not shear, then it will raise and form a cyclone. Now, when there is no wind shear, when we say no wind shear, then the air will move upward and they form cyclone. If the wind shear is there, then it will not move upward. It will spread somewhat like this. So during the monsoon, we find wind changes its direction rapidly. So hence we say it is more amount of wind shear. Wind shearing is more in the monsoon. And pre-monsoon and post-monsoon, no wind shearing, less wind shearing. So wind moves straight. Without deviation, less deviation. Then, apart from these, if you see the coastal areas, the region here, because of shape of the coastline, the northern Sircar is the area where more landfalls takes place. So this is called as northern Sircar. Or Andhra coast, where more cyclones will hit because of shape of the coastline. So more landfalls will make landfall here. the northern Sirkar, Andhra coast. Andhra coast is the region where more number of the cyclones will fall. Then the extreme severe cyclones, the dangerous cyclones will fall on the Utkal coast, Odisha coast, Utkal coast, where severe cyclone will fall. Utkal coast, severe cyclone will make landfall in the Utkal coast. So Utkal coast or Odisha coast is associated with severe cyclones, and more number of cyclones will fall in the northern Sirkar. So be careful with that. The severe cyclones will be in the Utkal coast, Odisha, West Bengal, and these areas. Northern Sirkar, the more number of cyclones. The deadliest cyclones will be in the Utkal coast, severe or deadliest cyclones, because they gain more latent energy when they reach. Apart from that, apart from these data, normally we find the number of cyclones are more in Bay of Bengal. Bay of Bengal has more cyclones than Arabian Sea, right? So Bay of Bengal has more cyclone than Arabian Sea. This you already read in your geography part, right? Now in some conditions we find the cyclones increases in the Arabian Sea. In some extraordinary conditions, the number of cyclones increases in Arabian Sea. So we refer that as special case. This is your basic geography. So generally we find the number of cyclones are more in Bay of Bengal, and in certain cases it is more in Arabian Sea. So this is the profile, cyclone profile with reference to India, right? Now when the cyclone makes landfall, what happens? When the cyclone make landfall, what are its impacts are there? The first one is storm surges. Storm surges. I have explained what is storm surge while defining the floods. So whenever storm surges are there, it will flood the coastal areas, erosion of the beaches, loss of fertile land, damage to the structures. Then the wind velocity will be very high. And this wind velocity is because of steep pressure gradient. It will damage the structure, loss of power or communication, injuries, and destruction of the vegetation. So strong storm surge, strong wind. Then something called as heavy rainfall, which are seen in that areas. So storm surges, winds, and rain. Now generally when we talk about this, soil erosion, the soil will become saline. In the agricultural areas, the salinity increases, and this salinity affects the fertility. Now when we talk about the floods and rainfall, the animals, the biodiversities, they always are submerged, and that will lead to death of many animals, and many vegetations also get destroyed, right? Now if you take an example of cyclone in the Chennai, so it will make the power, communication, etc. So when the power, communication, internet is destroyed, what will happen to the industries? So it will bring huge economic losses. So these are the major losses where we see a landfall of a tropical cyclone is there. High velocity winds uproots the buildings. It will destroy the vegetation. So such types of vegetations will be there. Is it clear? So this is what you should remember in the context of your studies. Is it clear? So please remember these perspectives about the cyclones. Now, this National Disaster Management Authority and guidelines we will take up tomorrow. Now, there were some questions, right? So if any questions are there, you can raise now. About wind shear, understand this. Generally, when we talk about the shearing of the wind shear means the wind changing its direction. Where it will move from one place to another. So if it is high pressure and this is low pressure, when it changes its direction, it may not reach to the low pressure. So this is called as wind shearing. And generally during the monsoon, the southwest winds are very strong. The southwest monsoon winds. So the surface winds are very strong. And these surface winds make the wind shearing very strong. And hence, no cyclones are formed during, or very less amount of cyclones are formed during the southwest monsoon. Right. Tsunami is biological. See, in the context of maps, you have to first remember the map of India, and you have to put the data based on the requirement. Whether they're asking about national parks, you have to remember the national parks. Whether they're asking about the forest fires, you should remember that which area is vulnerable for forest fire. And if they're asking about agricultural crops, you should put. So map of India will be only one. Based on the need of the question, you have to put the data. So you have to prepare, or you have to practice map of India and world map. So India map is very important. World map is also important. And if you are taking any state government public service commission, so that state government map you should also prepare. State government map also should be prepared. Then only you will have rough idea. So rough sketches, and based on the need. If they ask about cyclones, you have to write the cyclones and all. If they ask on the forest fires, you have to put the data of forest fires in that region. So tomorrow you don't have class. Monday and Tuesday you will be having the classes. Tsunami is a biological or geophysical hut. See, tsunami is a geophysical. It's not something which we refer them as the culture, because tsunami, when we say, it is mainly because of earthquakes or landslides. So when I take tsunami, I'll explain that. You don't have to worry. I'll explain in detail about the tsunamis part. Right. So when you are having the data, so please remember that these are very important. Maps are very important. So Monday the class will be there, and Monday we will take up some previous year questions. So I'll try to answer some of the previous year's question. So we'll discuss on that. So when we talk about the tsunamis, so let me discuss that tomorrow. That is on Monday. So there you can ask the question on that. Is that clear? So we'll conclude the today's class, and Monday and Tuesday will be the last session. Of disaster management. So don't get much stress. So whatever information, whatever data you are getting through the PPTs and some terminologies, you can add up them. They can help you in making. Can management and precautions be mentioned temperance? In the context of management, we'll be discussing that Monday. Yes, management is required. That is structural and non-structural measures in all the disasters. So when you're writing the disaster, you should remember that what are the structural measures and what are non-structural measures. Always keep this in the mind. What are structural and what are non-structural measures? So this should be kept first. Second, what is pre-disaster management? How you will reduce the risk. So that should be kept in the mind. In the context of cyclones, early warning systems will be there. So that is pre-disaster management. And at the time of disaster, rescue and rehabilitation, post-disaster management, food availability, medicine availability. So these things you should remember in writing any questions. Is that clear? So please remember these words: structural measures, non-structural measures, etc. Control the bleaching of glacial lakes, but how can we know that it breaks? See, when we talk about controlled in the sense, so when the water is accumulated in the lakes, the synthetic aperture radar gives a data of increasing water level. So when the water level in particular lake has increased, by taking the data from SAR, you can make a breaching in that particular lake, not in all the lakes. So that's why the data will help us to understand where the water level has increased and where the breaching has to be done. Right. So when you talk about tropical cyclones are thermal in origin. Temperate cyclones are not thermal in origin. They are not dangerous. So generally we say temperate cyclones are human friendly. Western disturbances are not dangerous. Western disturbances, they are human friendly. Wind velocities are not strong. They bring some small amount of good rainfall here. Temperate cyclones. So please read that temperate cyclones are not dangerous. We refer them as human friendly. They are formed by the fronts. Right. So because of latent heat, there is formation of ice in the cyclone. See, when we talk about the ice in the tropical cyclone, you should always remember that the ice in the tropical cyclone is due to steep pressure gradient, the rising air, and we don't know why a part of a air descends down also in the eye. We don't know why the part of an air descends also in the tropical cyclone. Now, generally, when we talk about the tropical cyclones, this is an ocean. Now, here low pressure is created, and here the convergence takes place, and after that, this raises up, and the Coriolis force makes the wind to rotate. Now, once it is rotated, the moisture or latent energy is moving upward. After that, part of air descends down. Nobody knows why it is descending down. Part of air descends down, and this air which is descending down will create a typical type of a structure in the tropical cyclone, which is clear from clouds. No clouds are formed here. So this region is called as eye of a tropical cyclone, where it do not have clouds. No clouds are there. Why? Because a part of air descends down, and this air which is descending will not create any type of clouds, and this portion is referred as the eye of a tropical cyclone. Surrounding area is eye wall, which has cumulonimbus clouds and all. So low pressure, descending air, latent heat, all these factors are responsible for developing the eye. But remember, eye has no clouds. Why? A part of a wind descends downward, which do not favors the formation of clouds. That's what I told. No formation of clouds. Now, when we talk about the air, which air will make condensation? Ascending air or descending air? Which air can create condensation? Which air can create condensation? Ascending air or descending air? Right. Now, when the air is descending down, can it make any condensation? Simple as it is, right? So here condensation takes place only when the ascending is there. We refer that as adiabatic cooling. But in the eye of a tropical cyclone, a part of air is descending. This part of air which is descending, so rather than adiabatic cooling, it is have adiabatic heating. So this is how adiabatic heating. And adiabatic heating do not favors the formation of clouds. And hence we don't have clouds in the eye portion of tropical cyclone. As simple as it is. Is that clear? Now, nobody knows why that is descending down. Nobody knows. Right. So when we talk about ascending is somewhere, when we say ascending, talks about expansion. So please read them carefully. when the air is heated, it expands. And as it expands, we find the cooling takes place. Per unit heat is reduced there. So please read them carefully. Adiabatic heating and adiabatic cooling. See, this is an air. When it is heated, it will expand. It will expand. So that's why clouds are formed at great height. Now, what is the size of the clouds? Are they smaller or are they bigger? Right. So it is expansion where the per unit heat is distributed. So this air expands when it moves up. That is called as adiabatic. Right. Keep them as simple as possible. So by this, we can end the session. Read them carefully. Take your basics of geography, environment basics, and read them, linking them with your PPTs. Pressure gradient affect the ice. Yes, pressure gradient will affect the wind pattern. Pressure gradient will affect the wind patterns. Right. So take care. Happy weekend. And then we'll meet up on Monday at the same time. Bye-bye.